Hello to the members of the Agape Class and the Young Men's Bible Class. If this is your first time joining us, this is the combined faith formation classes, the Agape Class and the Young Men's Bible Class, two of our larger adult Sunday school classes here at First Presbyterian Church, located at 617 North Elm Street, next to Fisher Park near downtown Greensboro. I'm Lane Ridenhour, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us as we gather together online for worship and study on this, the seventh Sunday after Epiphany, Sunday, February 20th. The Reverend Jill Duffield, our senior minister, will be preaching today at both the 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock services, our 9 o'clock contemporary Rejoice service, and our 11 o'clock traditional sanctuary service here at the church. You're cordially invited to worship with us in person. But if for some reason you're unable to do so, we encourage you to watch the live stream of our 11 o'clock sanctuary service. Just go to our church website, www.fpcgreensboro.org. That's www.fpcgreensboro.org. And there you'll find links to our 11 o'clock live stream, as well as links to our church bulletin and other church news and information. Our Sunday school teacher, Professor Sandie Gravett, will be joining us in just a few moments as she continues her series of talks on the subject of light, as seen in both the Old and the New Testament. But first, let's warm up our hearts and minds with the singing of a hymn. Blest be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. This sentimental hymn was written back in 1772 by Reverend John Fawcett, who was a Baptist minister who had been assigned to Wainsgate, which is in Yorkshire in England. The community was once described as a straggling group of houses on the top of a barren hill. And the people were described as all farmers and shepherds, poor as Job's turkey. I'd never heard that phrase before. An uncouth lot whose speech one could hardly understand. They were unable to read or write. Most of them were pagans, cursed with vice and ignorance and wild tempers. What a description of a community. The mainstream churches had made no inroad into that area, but then the Baptists decided to send this young preacher fresh out of seminary to try to make an inroad. Well, Reverend John Fawcett and his wife went to live there following his ordination, and by engaging with the families on a house-to-house basis, he built up a congregation that grew to the point that they had to add a gallery to the meeting house to accommodate everyone. His reputation as a preacher grew, and after about 7 years in Wainsgate, Reverend Fawcett received a call from a very prestigious parish in London with more financial resources. And Reverend Fawcett was very excited about that, thought it would be good for him and his family, so he decided to accept that call. The announcement was made to the church, and the farewell sermon was preached, and soon on moving day, they loaded up the rest of their belongings, and his congregation came to say goodbye. They were all just desolate and all in tears. Reverend Fawcett and his wife decided then and there that they just couldn't leave the community that they'd grown to love, so they didn't. They stayed in Wainsgate for another 45 years. Reverend Fawcett wrote this hymn, Blest Be the Ties That Bind, to help celebrate the strength of our connections, both old and new. Now, we find that it speaks to us here at First Presbyterian Church right now, as at the end of this month, the Reverend Neil Donovan, our executive pastor, will be retiring after 18 years of ministry with us. And as the text says in this hymn, we will forever be joined in heart and hope to meet again, Neil. I'll put the words up on the screen for you and invite you to sing along with me. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love.
Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship before our Father's throne. We pour our ardent prayers, our fears, our hopes, our aims are one, our comforts and our cares. We share our mutual woes, our mutual burdens bear, and often for each other flows the sympathizing tear. When we asunder part, it gives us inward pain, but we shall still be joined in heart and hope to meet again.
Years ago, when I first traveled to Israel and then eventually to places like Greece and Turkey and Egypt and Jordan, it was common in the marketplaces to see all these souvenirs with blue eyes. It could be on jewelry like necklaces and bracelets, keychains, on things to hang on your rearview mirror or in your windows or even on a baby's crib. And there were these hands with elaborate decorations, sometimes including that eye. They were called hamsa. Not being familiar with such things, I asked what these items were. It turns out they reflect traditions dating back to the earliest human objects from that region. They are designed to ward off the evil eye. The tradition of doing so is not unique to that part of the world. We can find references to such objects and objects themselves, all designed to keep away the evil eye in various places and cultural settings. Significantly for us, while the biblical translators often obscure the references, they are also common in our Bible. If, for instance, you look up Proverbs 28:22 in the New Revised Standard Version or the New International Version, you will read, "The miser is in a hurry to get rich and does not know that loss is sure to come." That miser is referred to a stingy one in the New International Version. But here's an instance where the King James Version is helpful. It says, "He that hasteth to be rich hath an evil eye, and considereth not that poverty shall come upon him." You see, the evil eye is in the Hebrew. Likewise, in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 9, we find that same pattern. "Be careful that you do not entertain a mean thought, thinking, the 7th year, the year of remission, is near, and therefore view your needy neighbor with hostility and give nothing. Your neighbor might cry to the Lord against you, and you would incur guilt." So it's this hostility, or in the NIV, ill will. The King James, again, gets it right. "And thine eye be evil against thy poor brother," it says. Lest you think this material is just in the Hebrew Bible, I can assure you it's in the New Testament as well. In fact, it's going to be in a passage that we want to consider today in our series on light in Epiphany. Let me set things up for you. In Luke chapter 11, Jesus says something about light similar to what we saw in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 a couple of weeks ago. "No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it in a cellar, but on the lampstand, so that those who enter may see the light." In Luke, however, these words are not in his reporting of the Sermon on the Plain, but rather appear in a later sequence of instructions and teachings by Jesus. Moreover, there is another saying from Jesus about light that immediately follows from it. And this second saying also shows up later in Matthew during the Sermon on the Mount. I want to highlight those sayings, and I want to show them to you side by side. You will notice they are close to one another, but not exactly the same. First, Luke 11. Your eye is the lamp of your body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But if it is not healthy, your body is full of darkness. Therefore consider whether the light in you is not darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, with no part of it in darkness, it will be as full of light as when a lamp gives you light with its rays. And in Matthew, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? The first thing that should capture your attention here is that eye is singular. This little detail is an immediate clue that the passage is not about physical vision. In other words, it is not focused on what our eyes do in a traditional sense. If it's not that, however, then what are these passages about? Well, Jesus tells us that the eye is a lamp and one that is within our body. When we are puzzling through what he means, we go to what we already know, namely that a lamp is a source of light. But that doesn't make too much sense to us in terms of physicality. We then try reading metaphorically. And what may help us is the idea that Jesus is talking about the core of who we are, the things that we feel most deeply and desire in our hearts. This eye lamp is therefore all about what we project from the interior to the world exterior to us. And even though in some cultures people believed you could spot folks with the evil eye and often tied that to some specific physical characteristic, here Jesus is talking just as much about self-assessment as anything else. The translators of the New Revised Standard Version prove useful for modern readers in the sense that they make it as if we are in need of a well-being checkup. Let's look at what this word that the New Revised Standard Version translates as healthy is. The Greek here is haplos, and it only appears in the New Testament in these two passages. Any scholar is going to tell you that rare words can be troublesome because we don't have the opportunity to see them impressed into service in a variety of circumstances, and thus we have difficulty getting a strong feel for the range of what they can mean. What we do know is this: the word appears to indicate simple or single, and the best we can say is that it suggests uncomplicated. But saying your eye is simple or single or uncomplicated doesn't say all that much to us about what Jesus is trying to communicate. What helps a little bit more is a contrast that the writer draws. Another kind of status for that eye, opposite from the first, is characterized by a term with which we have more familiarity, poneros. If we are talking in a physical sense, it can mean bad, as in diseased. But if we're talking ethically, it can mean bad as in evil or wicked. It is indeed the evil eye. Once again, the translators of the King James Version went to the traditional idea and may translate it more accurately than anybody else. The light of the body is the eye. Therefore, when thine eye is single, thy whole body is also full of light. But when thine eye is evil, thy body also is full of darkness. Let's ponder this idea. The thought is that the eye is like a gateway between who we are inside and what we direct towards the world. If one has an evil eye, as we saw in the passages in Proverbs and Deuteronomy, It was traditionally associated with envy, malice, greed, or even miserliness. People believed that when a person with an evil eye cast it towards an object, it could cause crops or other means of livelihood to fail. It could cause illness or even death to children or to animals. It could result in losses in battle or something like damage to one's honor or reputation. That is, they projected darkness outward in ways that had real-world consequences. That may seem quite superstitious to most of us, but I'm going to say this. While we may not affirm any magical properties to the ways other people look at us, we know that people can and do project their darker thoughts, whether they happen to be personal or reflect more corporate ideas, onto others. Indeed, we live in a time and in a culture where the corporate eye may be off in the sense that too many of us find it acceptable to look down on others who may not dress in the latest fashion with the right labels, or drive a late model car, or have the best new phone or the right kinds of earbuds. But more significantly, we know that our gaze can have other kinds of damaging impacts. What kind of feeling do you think it evokes in a person who is looked upon with suspicion when they're doing routine things like shopping, or treated as if they're someone to be feared when they're simply walking down the street, based solely on the way that they look, their age, the color of their skin? What do you think it evokes in a person to have their accomplishments belittled when someone says that they did well for a woman, or for someone whose first language is not English, or something similar? What kind of effect does it have on an individual to be seen as less than because they are differently abled, or perhaps because they are older? Almost any of us can pull up some incident when cruel words or poor treatment from another person based on an arbitrary standard in that person's mind caused us hurt. And many of us can recall what it feels like to be lumped into a group that boxed in and limited our possibilities, kept us from being what we might have envisioned for ourselves. When we look to this verse and think about those things, it is easier to start understanding what Jesus was saying. But there's also something else to what he teaches here. Look at the next bit in Luke. Therefore, consider whether the light in you is not darkness. What he says at this point is if our eye, meaning our personal eye, our internal self, is dark, we can fail to see it as such. To keep with the metaphor, you have a lamp, and you might think it is doing its job. But is it projecting not light, but darkness? Now that's a weird image for most of us. How can a lamp project darkness? The writer of Matthew, in fact, draws a conclusion. He says, if the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? We have to ask ourselves the question then, how can light be darkness? To demonstrate more about what Jesus means, let me take you to a parable in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20. It is a familiar parable, but a difficult lesson. Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven, and he says it's like a landowner who goes out early in the morning to hire laborers for the vineyard. And you'll remember that he hires some at the crack of dawn, some about 9 o'clock, some around noon, some 3 o'clock, a few at 5 o'clock. And when the evening finally comes, the owner of the vineyard said to the manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and going to the first." It's simple enough as a premise, right? Workers have been working different amounts of time over the course of the day. The parable goes on. When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. That seems generous, a full day's pay for a couple of hours of work. You know that they were not only surprised and pleased, but the ones still waiting in line to get paid likely also felt their pulse quicken. The text tells us that they were anticipating more than they bargained for. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. That but is a big one. Is that fair? Is it right? So they grumble against the landowner, saying, "Those people only worked an hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." These workers think they are projecting light, standing up for what is good and casting a light for the fair judgment of their effort. Jesus, however, is not having any of it. He has the landowner reply, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I gave to you." Jesus is telling them something that strikes most of us as not quite right. He's saying, you contracted with me for a price. If I choose to be generous to someone else, how is that harm to you? But he poses the question differently. He says, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I'm generous? The King James Version again helps us with this verse because it renders it in a more literal way. I've got it here on the bottom. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? And here we are, back to the problem from the passage for today. The eye of those workers, we are being told, who saw something generous being done and wanted more, is a display of their darkness. Or so Jesus tells us. He says they are motivated by envy rather than seeing that they were paid sufficiently and appropriately for their work. And thus he concludes, so the last will be first and the first will be last. If we're honest, this parable probably makes us squirm. Our squirminess is not because Jesus is preaching against pay equity. That's not at all the carry-away message. Instead, when speaking about how God's kingdom works, to use the terms of Luke chapter 11, it is about our eye and whether or not it is simple or complicated. Can we accept the idea that God is gracious to all, even to people that we don't see as deserving of God's grace? To pull in a couple of other parables, can we accept that the parent still loves the prodigal sibling while seeming to take for granted the one that stays at home on the straight and narrow? Can we look with care and concern to the person who is in need by the side of the road, even though they might be different from us, like the Good Samaritan? There is this idea that when the lamp that is our eye, our inmost self, is simple or uncomplicated or straightforward, meaning morally sound and with generous intentions, it does its job of bringing light without any fuss or bother. And that person is satisfied with that eventuality. They are, in short, filled with light. I think here of a child and how their innocence, their simplicity, means that they can find the joy, the love, the grace in even the smallest of things. By contrast, an evil eye exposes a heart filled with selfishness, envy, greed, and jealousy. No matter what one appears to be on the surface, there is darkness underneath. And thus we have to ask how to make sense of all of this. I cannot think of a better example of this idea about simplicity and light than from a story that made the headlines this past week. It is about Olympic speed skater Brittany Bowe. You likely have read or heard about it. Brittany Bowe and her teammate Erin Jackson grew up together in Florida doing many of the same sports. Each was on the precipice of great success in speed skating. Indeed, Jackson, pictured here on the left, was number 1 in the world at the 500-meter distance. Here is where the tale gets dramatic. There was a meet in January to determine who would be on Team USA. Bowe had already qualified for the Olympic team at the 1,000 meters and the 1,500 meters, which were more her races. And then it came time for the qualifying at the 500-meter length. Bowe skated and placed first out of all the competitors that had already gone before her. She was guaranteed one of the 2 spots on the U.S. team at the 500-meter distance. Then Jackson took the ice. She, however, took a near fall and could not recover the time. She came in 3rd, not in the top 2. Even though she was number 1 in the world at that distance and had won multiple top international events in the season just past, she was watching her Olympic dream disappear before her eyes. And as we all know, the Olympics only come around once every 4 years. Without hesitation, Bowe hugged her and told her it wasn't going down that way. Bowe ceded her spot in the event to Jackson. When asked about the decision, Brittany Bowe said it was in the Olympic spirit, and it was the right thing to do. If that is not the definition of inner light I'm talking about, I don't know what is. There was no envy, there was no malice, there was just light, grace, and generosity. Now, the complicated qualification math for the Olympics meant that Bowe had a chance to get a 3rd American spot in that event. Jackson would not have had that chance, and Bowe did end up getting to skate in it. Even more, she was given the honor to be the American flag bearer at the opening ceremony. When it came to the 500 meters, she skated alongside her friend and came in 16th. But Erin Jackson took the opportunity that her friend and teammate gave her and made it gold, with Bowe cheering loudly for her on the sidelines. Anthony DeMello, a Jesuit priest and a popular writer, speaker, and teacher, said that we have to think about God and thus about ourselves as followers of God in this way. He wrote, "Take a look at a rose. Is it possible for the rose to say, 'I'll offer my fragrance to good people and withhold it from bad people'? Or can you imagine a lamp that withholds its rays from a wicked person who seeks to walk in its light? It could do that only by ceasing to be a lamp. And observe how helplessly and indiscriminately a tree gives its shade to everyone, good and bad, young and old, high and low, to animals and humans and every living creature, even to the one who seeks to cut it down. This is the first quality of compassion, its indiscriminate character." This passage is about the indiscriminate quality of God's compassion, of God's light. It is what we should see about God, and it is what we should expect of ourselves. If our eye is indeed a lamp, and if that lamp is shining outward, we want it to be casting these kinds of rays everywhere. The writer of Luke says it this way: "If then your whole body is full of light, with no part of it in darkness, it will be as full of light as when a lamp gives you light with its rays." But that's a challenge for most of us. We often struggle to see as God sees, and thus we are often not aware that what we think of as our light may actually be darkness. I find the spiritual teacher Meister Eckhart understands the conundrum, and I want to show you his words. He wrote, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love." What he means is that when we seek God, we want nothing other than what God is and what God wills. That is all that there is. The Apostle Paul wrote about it this way in Galatians 2. "I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me." Your eye is the lamp of your body. What is it that makes our eye healthy and full of light? How many ways can we be told? It is God. Simple and uncomplicated, isn't it? Thank you once again for your attention. I look forward to concluding this series on light during the season of Epiphany next week.